My name is Margaret Hale. People call me Maggie. When I look at my hands now, wrinkled and spotted by time, I still remember how they felt when they were young, steady, warm, and endlessly busy. Those hands carried a child when I had nothing but hope. Those hands sewed shirts at midnight, held a homework sheet at dawn, and wiped a fevered forehead with a damp cloth in the quiet hours. Those hands made promises without a sound. I promised my son, Michael, that I would always be his shelter. After his father died when Michael was 5, I became both mother and father to him. I learned to cook, to listen, to laugh at jokes he made as a boy, and to stand up for him in classrooms and at soccer fields. I worked double shifts cleaning other people's homes and waiting tables. I sold my wedding ring for winter coats when he was 8 and the cold cut through our thin jackets. I told myself each night, as I lay on the floor while Michael slept in the small bed we shared, everything will be better. I will make a life for him. He did not disappoint me. He graduated. He got a good job. He learned to be careful with money and to be polite in meetings. He dated a bright woman named Claire, who later became his wife. I was proud. I thought of my sacrifices like small stones thrown into a pond. Those ripples had reached a son who would stand tall one day. I never imagined the day would come when that same son would smooth my hair, kiss my forehead, and hand me a small suitcase while explaining, carefully, that I was going to live somewhere else for a while, some place called Willow Springs Care Center. People often talk about home as if it's only a place. For me, home was a history, the narrow kitchen with the window over the sink, the shelf where we kept the spare change in a jam jar, the loose floorboard Michael used as a stage for toy cars. It was the sound of his feet in the hallway and the way the light came through the maple tree in the front yard in late afternoon. I remember Michael's first-grade teacher calling me one spring and saying, "Mrs. Hale, Michael is very kind. He shared his lunch with a boy who forgot his." That evening I knelt on the kitchen floor and mended a hole in Michael's jacket by hand. I whispered, "My son, a kind heart is the only wealth you will ever need." Years of small choices became a life. I learned to make ends meet with careful math and thrift store treasures. I held on to the small joys, an apple pie cooling on the window, a picture Michael drew for school, the smell of coffee early in the morning. We were poor in money but rich in the simple ways that count if you know how to look. When Michael brought home Claire, I felt a strange mixture of pride and relief. I wanted him to be happy. I wanted him to have someone to share his burdens with. When they married, I ironed his shirt and tied his bow tie with the same trembling joy I had at his first school recital. I thought my job was done in a way. I had given him a life and a partner to walk into his future. Time, the quiet thief, steals things slowly. Claire and Michael fell into the rhythms of professional life. They moved to a condo in town. They started hosting dinners with coworkers and walking into restaurants that were more modern than my old kitchen. They thanked me politely for dinners but began to have their own habits. At first, it was small changes, an extra sofa cushion that became theirs, a recessed shelf filled with items that were never mine to touch. Then I noticed that when they planned weekend plans, there was less space in the calendar for a woman who had spent a lifetime putting them first. Still, I told myself it was fine. I understood careers and obligations. I was proud of the life Michael had built. I focused on the letters from neighbors I had helped, the friendships that had grown in the church choir, and the garden bed where I was coaxing roses. But life has a way of rearranging priorities without asking permission. One afternoon, Michael asked me to sit with him at the kitchen table. His voice felt smaller than usual. There would be no ease in that conversation. "Maggie," he said, shuffling through a stack of bills he kept in a small plastic folder, "your doctor says they want you to have more supervision. The chef at the care center said they can handle medication and meals. They have physical therapy, things we can't provide 24/7. I looked at him and found I could not find the part of my chest that did not know his voice. "They?" I asked slowly. "Michael, that is. It's temporary," he added quickly. "Just a few months. Until I finish Q4 and get the promotion. Until Claire's schedule eases up. We can afford help, this will ensure you're safe. They will take good care of you. You'll have activities, people around. That's better than me hiring part-time help and having someone in and out of the house." He spoke as if reading a script. He spoke with concern, but there was a distance there too. He spoke like a man used to making decisions based on spreadsheets and time blocks, not like the small boy who had once refused candy so I could have it. That night I packed a small suitcase the way people pack for a short trip. I included a cardigan, my photo album, the recipe index cards my mother had given me, and a dress I liked for church. I kissed the photo of my wedding on the dresser and told the house, as if it could hear me, "I will be back." I said, "I will be back," because I wanted to believe it. That was the promise I needed to step out the door. Willow Springs was cleaner than I imagined. The front desk had a bright wooden sign, an arrangement of real flowers behind the counter, and a receptionist with 2 white teeth and precisely folded name badge. The rooms looked like hotel rooms with smaller beds. There were activity schedules on corkboards and a large television room with a couch that was softer than my old living room. That first night, though, the building felt like an airport concourse at midnight, full of bodies, half asleep, carrying histories nobody asked to read. I lay awake and listened to the sounds of the place. There were sighs and coughs and softer cries. I realized that everyone living there had a story. I met Mr. Thompson the second morning over breakfast, when he tipped his cereal onto my tray and apologized as if he had spilled toast. He was a retired machinist with hands like anchor chains and a laugh that cracked like old paint. He had a way of saying things as if he'd been thinking them for a long time. Then there was Evelyn Brooks, a former librarian who recited poetry while knitting small socks for the local shelter. She had a memory for lines and an old-fashioned grace. There was Rosa, from down the road, with a laugh like marbles rolling on wood. There was Harold, who had been a volunteer firefighter and who could tell you the sound of a siren in 3 different cities. The staff were youngest to me: Hannah, who worked as a CNA and hummed as she did bed checks; Nurse Jenna, who knew every injection schedule; Dr. Allen, who came by once a week with a stethoscope and a soft manner. They took care of the small things with efficiency and kindness. But they could not fix the dull ache that comes when your life has been folded and stored in someone else's filing system. There were activities. I tried them all. I planted herbs in a little raised bed with Harold and he taught me how to prune rosemary. I read aloud in a group with Evelyn on Tuesdays and the voices of Hemingway and Baldwin found new ears. I painted during art therapy and discovered I liked blue, especially deep, stormy blues. Those moments made the edges of the place softer. They reminded me that life can exist in many rooms, not only the one I remembered. Over weeks, Willow Springs became less like an airport and more like a small town. There were potlucks and bingo nights that were louder than church choir. People came and went, families visited on Sunday afternoons with coffee cups and apologies tucked under their jackets. There were volunteers who read comics to residents and college students who came to do research on eldercare but stayed for the stories. I found roles I did not expect to find. I started the Memory Circle, a weekly afternoon where residents read from family albums and tell stories in the common room. I would talk about the summers by the river, the nights of power outages when we played cards by candlelight, the first time Michael rode a bicycle on our street and fell and got up with tears then laughter. People listened, and the room grew warm with remembered light. The small friendships mattered. Evelyn taught me how to tie a scarf so it did not slip. Harold taught me the exact angle to prune a rose. Mr. Thompson taught me how to fix a light switch by tapping the right screw. Hannah's laughter soothed more than the best medicine sometimes. But beneath the laughter, there was always the question of return. I waited for Michael's visits. He came rarely. When he did appear, he checked his phone often, took calls, and spoke about work. He patted my hand and said he loved me. He said he would get me home once a contractor finished a repair and he could be sure I'd be safe. He promised a weekend visit that never happened. He promised a holiday dinner that was changed for business travel. Each promise was a small paper boat on a river that did not bring it back to shore. One quiet afternoon, I walked into the hall past the mailboxes. There was a bulletin board pinned with flyers, a pizza night, a volunteer tutor needed, an estate planning workshop. I stopped to look at a small flyer for a community yard sale and noticed my name stuck under donations, as if someone had typed it and not thought to check whether it was true. The little white paper trembled like my own hands. Then, in the staff lounge, where tall mugs sat in a row and a radio played old songs, two women were talking, lower than the television. I pretended to be tying my shoe outside the door, but I heard the words like weather news. Did you see the listing on Elm Street? That whole place got snapped up. New owners came in, paid in cash, said one voice. Oh yeah, said the other, the house with the rose bushes, sold to a developer. It's getting ripped down next month. Can you imagine? Something small and hard lodged under my ribs. Elm Street. The house with the maple in front and the porch swing. The one Michael said he was just making safe fixes to. I tried to catch my breath. I went home, back to Willow Springs was my new home now, and stared at the picture of my old house in my album. That house had belonged to my family for decades. My mother had mended the same porch swing. My son had stood in that yard with a kite that ballooned into the sky. I called Michael. His voice was polite and all business. We had to sell the house to cover things, he said. You can't live alone anymore. We made a good choice. I'll visit this weekend. He did not ask me whether I wanted the sale. He did not ask me whether I knew. I felt a coldness that was not just about money. It felt like a forgetting. Once the seed is planted, questions grow in your head. I began to pay attention in ways I had not planned. The social worker at Willow Springs, a woman named Jenna, was kind and attentive. I told her, quietly, did anyone tell me about the sale of my home? Jenna's face softened and she said, we can help you look into it, Margaret. If you want, we can contact the county records together. Or the patient advocate can help with elder law if you prefer. I wanted to believe it was an honest mistake. But when Jenna pulled up the county records on a slow Tuesday, my hands in my lap, the art class painting drawing on a table beside me, I learned the truth. The deed had changed hands 3 months ago. It was a quick, clean transaction in the records, and the buyer's name was a small local development company, Riverstone Partners, listed as an LLC in a filing. The sale had been signed with what looked like a power of attorney. I felt the floor step out from under me. How, I started, but the words would not complete. I had never signed anything. I remembered the mail slips that had not come, the checks that had not appeared. I remembered Michael's calm voice and the contractors who had come and gone. Margaret, are you okay? Jenna asked. We can call a lawyer. There are protections for this kind of thing if your signature was forged or if you were unduly influenced. Let's not jump to conclusions, but we can investigate. The idea of legal counsel was frightening. I had never done anything like that before. But I also knew that things were not as they seemed. We hired an elder law attorney, Mrs. Klein, a woman with short hair and a clipboard who smelled faintly of lavender and confidence. She listened as I spoke and then opened a manila folder and pulled out photocopies. "We'll need to look at signatures and timelines," she said. "If a power of attorney was executed improperly, we can file to void the transaction." As the days ran, we collected papers. We found a contractor's receipt that listed "initial consult" on a date when I had been at Willow Springs for an art therapy class. There were emails, somewhere between Michael and Riverstone Partners, discussing as-is purchase and minimal closing timeline. The deed had a signature. It had been signed at a notary. The date lined up with the same week Claire and Michael said they were working out logistics. We subpoenaed the notary's logs. The notary swore the signature matched a document notarized at 10:45 in the morning with a driver's license that matched my name, yet I had not been there. The swearing of papers went on. Who was the person who came to the notary? A relative? A friend? The record said the person presented identification. "You were there when the notary witnessed the signature?" Michael said to me on the phone, his voice tight. "You agreed, Mom. You signed. I told you selling would be painless." "I did not sign anything," I said. "Why would I sign it? Why didn't anyone tell me?" He sighed. "Look, Mom. I'm doing what I have to do. You're safe. That house would have been a burden. Claire and we thought this is better. We had to act fast. Riverstone paid well. It was a good deal." It was then that the first twist cleaved me. Michael had not merely been neglectful, he had sold my home to a developer, using paperwork that suggested my permission. He told me it was for my safety. But the truth smelled different. It smelled of contracts and convenience. There is a strange energy that comes when a person decides to fight something that feels larger than themselves. It is not always righteousness. Sometimes it is the stubbornness of a person who remembers how to stand. For me, it was a mixture, rage, grief, and a sharp, practical clarity. Mrs. Klein filed suit to void the sale. Jenna helped gather witness statements from neighbors who had seen strangers knocking on my door. Evelyn, with her sharp Regency memory for place and time, remembered a man delivering a stack of forms simulating estate planning pamphlets. Harold's memory for people's faces was vivid, and he could describe the contractor's boots. Riverstone Partners argued that they had purchased the property legally and had relied on the power of attorney. Michael, meanwhile, did not call often. When he did, his voice was full of stress and he said he would come the next weekend and explain everything. He did not arrive. The hearings were slow. The judge looked at signatures and notary records and asked for handwriting analysis. It was an unintentionally bureaucratic tooth-and-nail battle that took months of waiting. Meanwhile, Riverstone continued to move. They had plans for the property, visions of condos and a small coffee shop where the maple tree would be cut down. Flyers arrived in the mail announcing Elm Street redevelopment. Willow Springs became my anchor. I walked the garden paths and met with other residents who joined me in the small fight, some because they were inspired, some because they wanted to see a neighbor stand up. Evelyn read poetry about time and property. Harold kept bringing me hand-me-down magazines about older citizens who had won odd little triumphs. Through those months, Michael's silence expanded like a physical distance. When he did come, he was raw with shame or else practiced with a calm that felt like armor. Claire's eyes were hard, and she spoke in ways I had never liked, short, certain statements about practicalities. "This is for the best," she told me once, as if the phrase itself could erase the ache that I had to learn patience for legal patience, which is slow and white. I learned to write letters in block print so the clerk could read them. I learned how to show up in a metal chair at the county clerk's office and wait in line. I learned the names of lawyers and their cross-examinations. I learned something else, too, that people who care will show up. The community center volunteers came to support. One man brought a plate of pie, a woman I'd once helped clean her windows turned up with a letter from her granddaughter promising to help. It was in the second month of hearings that the second layer of the twist was revealed. Jenna, in a quiet moment, showed me an email thread she had pulled as part of discovery. It was a conversation that made the letters feel 3D, concrete and cruel. In the emails, Claire had been corresponding with a project manager at Riverstone Partners. The tone at first was formal, then practical. She spoke about expediting the timeline and reducing the risk of contested probate. She mentioned how difficult it would be to manage an elderly parent and suggested that if the property could be acquired quickly, the transition would be smoother. The name on the other side of the email was a development director I had never met. There were attachments, documents that outlined quick purchase plans for properties where an elderly homeowner required care relocation. The language was clinical. It read like a business model that had found a hole in the market: purchase homes at market price when family members consented to move elderly relatives into institutional care, develop the land for lucrative small projects. The second twist landed with a weight that made me feel suddenly younger and older at once. This was not simply neglect. This was a scheme, an exploitation of a vulnerable situation, enabled by a family member's silence and a company's willingness. I read those emails with a fury I did not expect. I laid them on the table and took a deep breath. I thought of all the afternoons I had spent teaching Michael to tie his shoes, wiping his nose when he was small, and standing outside a principal's office with a calm face. I felt, in that instant, like someone who had been used as a stepping stone. In the middle of these legal storms, a small hand reached for me, Lily, my granddaughter. She was 9, brown hair in a bob, eyes that reminded me of Michael when he was that age. Lily came to visit, a shadow and a smile. She arrived with a backpack full of school papers and a secret plan. She slipped into our room one evening carrying 2 paper boats. "Dottie," she whispered, "I made these. You can use them to send messages." Lily had decided, in child logic, that the world could be righted with imagination and small tools. She could not sign papers or subpoena documents, but she could draw me pictures. She could hide notes in my cane and in my shoe that said, "I love you, Dottie." She could be the reason I remembered the soft machinery of forgiveness and the stubbornness of love. One afternoon, when she was staying the weekend with me, she mentioned that she had overheard Claire on the phone, laughing with someone. She said, "This was easier than I thought," Lily told me, repeating grown-up words that sounded like broken glass. She did not know what those words meant exactly, but she felt the tone. She saw the crease in Claire's forehead and felt. Children's ears hear the things adults try to keep quiet. Lily was a secret lifeline. She began to volunteer small acts of rebellion. She would place a cup of lemonade by my armchair or tuck a daisy behind my ear. She was a light that made the dark less absolute. Once Mrs. Klein filed a complaint and the discovery showed the chain of emails, Riverstone could not pretend it hadn't had anything to do with Claire. The local paper picked up the story. "Elder Displacement Under Scrutiny," read a headline. Suddenly, the quiet town's redevelopment deals were being looked into by reporters who smelled controversy like hounds smell blood. When the paper called me for a comment, I felt awkward. I had always been a private woman. But something changed in me. I realized there was power in story. I agreed to speak. I told the reporter how many nights I sat in my kitchen with a mug of tea and worried about my son. I told them about the signature on the deed that I had never witnessed. I said, quietly, I never wanted to be an object to be traded. The article included quotes from other families who suspected similar circumstances. It included interviews with activists who worked on elder law. There were experts who quoted statistics about developers and power of attorney abuse. Riverstone posted a statement saying it had acted properly and that any appearance of impropriety was an unfortunate misunderstanding. The attention changed the atmosphere. The town divided itself in small ways. Some folks said, "It's just business, people must plan." Others were visibly upset that a daughter-in-law had pushed for a sale without telling her mother. The headline had a way of giving courage to others who had been silenced. Press lights and county filings did not heal the ache. They made it visible. Michael came more often now, his appearances not to comfort but to negotiate and to reduce damage. Claire's manner hardened. She would not look at me directly. The first real, verbal confrontation came in a conference room at my lawyer's office, a room with a table that smelled of fresh polish and a poster of "Know Your Rights" on the wall. We sat across from each other like parties in a trial of small hurts. "Mom," Michael said, voice thin, "we did what we thought was best. You kept falling in the kitchen. You were forgetting things. We had to do it. That house was more than a burden." "You could have told me," I said. "You could have asked me. You could have let me sign papers with a lawyer present. You could have explained. You put your desire ahead of my autonomy. That is what hurts." He looked away. "I didn't want to fight. Claire, she didn't want to fight," I finished for him. "She wanted the house. You wanted convenience. You wanted an easy way. You lied to me about the sale." "Telling me I lied is unfair," he snapped. "You left the decision to us when you went to Willow Springs." "I didn't leave anything," I said. "I trusted you." That trust meant something. The room's air tightened. For a moment, I glimpsed the small boy who had once slept on my shoulder and felt a tenderness that almost made me fold. But then the image of the flyer on Elm Street came back to me, Elm Street redevelopment, and I felt the steadiness of someone who knows she must be unpersuaded by nostalgia. The story of Elm Street did something to the town. People gathered at the community center for meetings about elder rights. A local nonprofit began holding workshops on power of attorney and how to protect aging loved ones. Willow Springs put up a small display on the notice board reminding families to include residents in decisions and to bring in neutral witnesses for legal documents. Volunteers came to the memory circle and left with hugs. The reporter who wrote the first article did a follow-up showing the pattern of small sales and quick developments. It was as if our small story had pulled a thread and, unseen, a sweater began to unravel at the seams. Neighbors who had never come to Willow Springs before started walking the grounds on Sunday afternoons. Some brought old pies for the residents, others came to ask how they could help. When the judge set a hearing date for the deed, the room was full. The gallery had people standing because chairs were gone. The judge read the motion and then looked up at me and said, "Ms. Hale, you may speak." I told the truth. I told the court story after story, of a house that had lived under our family's hands for decades, of a porch swing that had been mended by my father, of a son who had kissed me and then sold the place for cash. I told them it was not about the money, it was about consent. The judge listened. The judge's face was inscrutable, but when he asked for the handwriting analysis and the notary's log, I felt the path of possibility open a little wider. The hearing was a slow, stoic thing. The notary came and explained that her logs recorded a person signing the deed and presenting a driver's license. The developer's attorney argued that Riverstone had acted in good faith and that the title company had insured the transaction. But then a witness was called, a woman who worked at another office where the notary occasionally visited. She remembered that the notary had called her a few days after the transaction, excited at the speed of the sale. She said someone had brought in a woman's ID and said she was signing on behalf of her mother, the witness testified. She described the man who delivered the papers and the driver's license that looked a bit too new. There was also an email from a Riverstone project manager to Claire that had been overlooked in earlier discovery, an attachment detailing how to streamline elderly client sign-off. When shown in court, the color leaked out of the room. Riverstone's attorney shifted in his chair. Michael sat in the front row with his head down. At times he glanced at me, like someone trying to measure a distance he had traveled and wanting to know if there was a path back. The judge's decision did not come that day. It took weeks. But when it came, the ruling favored me. The sale was voided due to irregularities around power of attorney and undue influence. The deed was returned to me. The judge reprimanded the transactional haste. Riverstone vowed an appeal. The press wrote about a small victory. I felt, for a moment, lighter, as if some weight I had carried alone had been taken to the side. But the victory was not everything. The house, though returned to my name in the records, had a contractor's permit issued and a "demolition pending" banner knotted at the gate. The developers moved faster than county red tape sometimes. The town had been polarized. My son's marriage was frayed. People whispered about my keeping the house versus letting it help the economy. The world was messy. With the court order in hand, I expected to go home and find my house waiting unchanged. But things in life rarely step back to the way they were. The pride in a house is not only a legal title. The house had been a place of daily small rituals: coffee, the bruise of a fallen bowl, the hum of the kettle, and many of those rituals had been disrupted. There were neighbors who had been supportive and others who made careful, neutral comments. Some had sold property nearby after Riverstone's announcement, not wanting to be part of the old neighborhood. I found that the house had been ransacked for valuation purposes, flowers uprooted, paint sampled, the kitchen cabinet replaced with a temporary panel. The porch swing was missing and there were scars in the oak posts where someone had taken measurements. The house could be saved, but it would take work, repairs, paint, a tree surgeon to coax the maple back into a shape that matched memory. I had the deed but not the same kitchen. I had my name on a document and the knowledge that a community's fabric can be easily tugged. But there was another, deeper revelation. As investigative pieces continued, more evidence came out about Riverstone's practices. The development company had, in several towns, quietly purchased homes where elderly owners had been moved into care, often with family members' cooperation. The emails, the attachments, the HR files showed a pattern. Claire's correspondence was businesslike and moralistically pragmatic. She had approached Riverstone months before and had expedited matters by suggesting that Michael encourage me to move. The evidence suggested that she had pushed for it. When confronted, Claire said she didn't know it would turn out this way. She said she had been under pressure from work, from the desire to start a family, from the hunger for a certain life. She had never imagined a demolition banner on our lawn. She apologized in the paper and in front of a camera once. But I had learned that apologies can be convenient for cameras. I did not talk about the ease with which the idea of my displacement had been suggested. I had raised Michael with the conviction that empathy matters. Still, the presence of a new human life, Claire speaking of a baby carriage, did complicate how the town judged her and how I judged my son. We fixed what we could. Volunteers painted, neighbors brought soil, Harold and Mr. Thompson volunteered to do the heavy lifting on weekends. Lily planted a small bed of marigolds in the front garden and declared it Mission Dottie. It was an odd mixture of legal victory and communal repair. Michael came less often. He called sometimes, voice a place of static. Once, he arrived with a box of old photographs, Polaroids that had been in a drawer. We sat on a rickety lawn chair and fingered through the photos like archaeologists of memory. There were pictures of him as a toddler with food on his face, a baseball bat propped next to him, Michael with a broken front tooth after a fall that I had patched with clumsy glue and milk. He cried once, quietly, and I put my hand on his shoulder. "I am sorry," he said. "I know," I answered, "but sorry is not always enough. It must have a backbone." We did not heal instantly. But we began to speak differently. He told me about the pressures at work, about debts he had taken on, about subtle blackmail from a contractor who wanted to flip the property quickly. He told me about his fear of losing Claire if he did not produce the life she wanted, a baby, a house with room. I did not romanticize his reasons. I tried to understand them, which is a different discipline than excusing them. I began to do something else with my time. The Memory Circle grew into a weekly community event, open to family members and local groups. We called it Stories and Suppers. We invited high school students to listen and then write essays about the elders' lives. Sometimes the students would read the essays aloud and I would watch them learning to listen. The local paper followed our activities. We connected with a nonprofit that worked on elder rights. I became an uneasy advocate, someone who had been wronged and now decided to help others not be wronged. It felt strange, but useful. The glow of votes for charitable causes and the power of a signed petition is small comfort, but it changes the shape of things. In courtrooms and community centers, I met people who had stories like mine. There was Denise, a nurse who had been coerced into signing a power of attorney by a relative. There was Mr. Willis, whose daughter had arranged for an assisted living transfer because she wanted to move across the country. Their stories were different but threaded with the same pattern: elders who had been quietly moved out of neighborhoods into institutional care, holding on to postcards as if they were lifelines. We gathered signatures. We wrote op-eds. We met with council members. We called for stricter oversight and for notary accountability. The work was not glamorous, but it was necessary. We found allies in unexpected places: students, retired lawyers, a local pastor, and together we made small ripples that began to feel like a tide. Willow Springs remained a place I loved in strange ways. The staff knew me and respected me, not as a defeated woman but as someone who had weathered things and then acted. Hannah pressed a cookie into my palm one afternoon and said, "You changed things around here." It was a small statement, but it meant a lot. Small changes pile up. I taught art classes there now, sometimes. We painted the wall in the common room with a mural of a river and houses like the ones our town formed. The river was blue and the houses had yellow doors. We painted a maple tree with thick branches. Children came with Lily on Saturday mornings and learned to mix colors, and the residents' laughter rose like music through the halls. Michael visited sometimes with Lily. Claire was quieter now, and over time she and I began to talk in a different tone, tentatively and dipped in a new civility. She had, as it turned out, been offered a job in another city and had refused it in the middle of our legal troubles. The strain had changed her too. She spoke about wanting to be part of Lily's life and, once, about how she regretted things she had done. Regret, we found, is not always a cleaner of wrongs, but it sometimes opens a door to conversation. Just when I thought the worst of the drama had passed, the story produced a new turn. Riverstone appealed. There were more hearings. The appeal uncovered other instances across the county. A grand jury was convened to examine whether developers had been colluding to speed purchases by encouraging relocation packages when elderly owners were persuaded to move to care centers. In the middle of the investigations, an internal memo from Riverstone surfaced, one that made the world smell coppery with truth. The memo outlined a business plan: identify older homeowners with care needs, secure family cooperation, purchase at fair market value, and redevelop. There was even a line about reducing legal friction by involving neutral third-party facilities. It was clinical. It was business. When the memo was published, the town flinched. The company's stock, if anyone had invested, took a hit. The mayor called for stronger local ordinances about elder relocation and resident consent. The state attorney's office opened a formal probe. For me, the memo felt like proof that my hurt had been part of a larger pattern. But with proof came pressure, not only to recover my own house in form but to help others. I found myself at speaking events, at city council meetings, telling my story slowly and with evidence. I told them the name of the notary, the dates. I told them about Claire's emails and the developer's memo. I told them how a son's choice can ripple into his mother's, whether in ways he might never have intended. Michael sat in the audience once and did not meet my eyes. Lily sat beside him and doodled in her notebook. She looked up once and smiled at me, as though to say, "We are still here." The public attention exacted a price. Our private lives were catalogued in 1,000 small ways. Neighbors who supported me were violently criticized by others who had seen different sides. My relationship with Michael frayed further when old resentment surfaced. He felt exposed. He felt judged. He grew quieter and more defensive. One night, after a council hearing, I found him waiting in the hallway for me. He was smaller somehow, as if time had reduced his shoulders a fraction. "Mom," he said, "I never meant to hurt you." "Maybe not in the way I was hurt," I answered. But intention is not the only measure. Action matters. We did not have a long argument. We had a conversation that stretched into 3 visits over weeks. He came with Lily. He listened to me talk about the family's money and how debts can change a person's choices. He talked about his fear of not being enough. In the corners of his answers were admissions. He had been tempted by the quickness of the sale. He had been promised a clean exit from responsibility. He had been afraid of failing. I listened and forgave in increments, not because I wanted an easy life but because children remain our blood. Forgiveness, I discovered, is not a single moment but a long practice. In the end, the appeal was dismissed. Riverstone settled on the courthouse steps, officially returning a small set of funds and agreeing to a local oversight board that would monitor future transactions where elderly homeowners were involved. Riverstone's executives were required to give testimony. The state attorney launched an administrative inquiry into notarial practices. The legal winds did not fix every broken thing. The porch swing was gone, but volunteers built a new bench. The maple tree still needed care, but it was pruned and watered. The house's kitchen, once gutted for inspections, was replaced by a community-minded contractor who donated time to reinstall cabinets. Michael found work that paid well enough but not as well as his old position. Claire and he eventually separated amicably. Time and distance made their own kind of truth. Lily visited more, often simply to sit and read. She asked me to teach her how to patch a hem. She liked holding the needle and watching fabric transform. The town's ordinances changed in small but important ways. Notaries were more rigorous about identification, voluntary witness requirements were strengthened. Willow Springs put in an informed consent checklist for families considering care relocation, with a free advocate present. For a long time I had wanted only to be recognized as a person with rights. I wanted my voice to be heard. That, after all, is the beginning of dignity. When the legal dust settled and the news cycles moved on, I had new daily rhythms. I continued to teach art classes at Willow Springs. I participated in community panels. I volunteered with the elder rights group to help others not repeat my mistakes. I took walks in the park with Lily and we searched for the shapes of clouds. We would list them: a whale, a teacup, a house. We would laugh. Michael and I found an awkward equilibrium. He was present enough to be my son. He was flawed but accountable. There were long silences sometimes, but there was also the small, everyday work of being family: calls about weather, jokes about a television show we both liked, a visit where he fixed a leaky faucet on my porch. I did not pretend the past was gone. It was marked into me like the grain in the old table. But I also discovered that life is like a long walk with many rest stops. You may be sent to new places, you may lose doors and windows, but you can learn to open new ones too. On the first summer after the settlement, we had a small gathering on the lawn. The bench volunteers had built sat under the maple, new and sturdy. Harold set out lemonade. Evelyn recited a poem. Lily ran between conversations and placed wildflowers in vases. Neighbors who had once argued sat shoulder to shoulder. I stood and said a few words, not legal but simple. I said thank you to the people who had helped. Then I told them, quietly, no one should be made into a property. No one is a commodity. A life is not a transaction. People clapped in the polite way people clap for a neighbor. The applause was a small thing, but that day I felt my world anchored again. Years, meaningful, slow, ordinary years, moved on. I kept at the memory circle, reading and listening. I kept writing short letters to the county clerk, occasionally sending suggestions about how the system could change. I taught Lily how to sew a simple hem. She grew into a young woman who visits with a bag of books, and then later with a boyfriend and then a small apartment key she shows me with a proud smile. Michael and I never became the same as we had been before the Elm Street episode. But we were human to each other again, with the mutual awkwardness and tenderness that characterizes deep relationships. He would sometimes bring over a pie. He fixed the back gate. One winter he snowblowed the walk and texted to ask if I wanted to go to a light display. Those things were not enough to erase the past, but they were how the future stitched itself back together. The town's ordinances held. Riverstone's leadership changed. The notary was reprimanded and retrained. People told the story for years as an example of how community can watch and help and intervene before a life is quietly moved. Sometimes, on cool evenings, I still sit on the bench under the maple tree and watch the street where the swing used to hang. I think about the boy who once held my hand while we walked to school. I think about the woman who packed a small suitcase for a short trip and did not return for a while. I think about the many small ways we harm and help the people in our lives. If there is a lesson in this long story, it is this: love and hurt can coexist. A son can be both beloved and betrayer. People can make bad choices and then be brave enough to make them right. The systems we live inside, legal, business, cultural, can be exploited. But they can also be reformed by stubborn people who insist upon rightness. When Lily asks me what the story is about, I tell her, simply, that people must be seen. Be kind to your elders, I say, and also ask the questions. Ask the hard questions. She nods, folding the hem she is learning to sew. I will, she says. The maple leans over the yard. The house that nearly vanished now stands with a new porch built by neighbors who remembered. The paint is a fresh, cautious yellow. The bench under the tree is worn with use. People come by in the afternoon and sit, young mothers with strollers, teenagers with folded shirts, older people with cups of tea. I did not want to be the headline I became. I would have preferred to simply be a mother who baked bread and watched her son become a man. But life is not only the things we prefer. It is the way we respond to the things that happen to us. I was left once, left physically in a place called Willow Springs. But I was not abandoned in the ways that matter most. I found my voice. I found allies. I found a new kind of home that was not a single set of walls but a community of people who chose to be there for one another. In the end, that is a quiet kind of triumph. It is not loud, but it is lasting. It is a place where a granddaughter can climb into your lap and a neighbor can bring a hammer and fix a step. It is a life that keeps being written every day. I read the pages of it and they are full of small lights.